Hello, Reid.
Hello, Alice.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Excellent. Well, just to add to the brief introduction, obviously co-founder of LinkedIn and Inflection, but I thought it was worth actually emphasising some of the connections you have to the UK. So you actually did a Masters of Philosophy here at Oxford some years ago?
Some years
Some years
ago,
ago.
I left my walker behind the stage.
And you also brought Silicon Valley Comes to the UK, an initiative with Sherry Kuti that was actually, when I was first starting Entrepreneur First many years ago, one of the first events we went to was Silicon Valley Comes to the UK, which was largely bringing incredible Silicon Valley big names and inspiring folk over to the UK to help build our ecosystem. So
Yeah, it's
thank you for doing that.
as Entrepreneur First does, it's building the networks that enable entrepreneurship. So it's part of the reason why we do events like this one and all the rest is because that network is what allows talent to find each other, learnings to flow. How do you navigate intelligent risks in order to create the future? Those kinds of things. That's what entrepreneurship's about, which obviously is part of what Entrepreneur First is doing. And so the Silicon Valley comes to the UK, Silicon Valley comes to the Oxford. Other things are the least ways that I can try to help.
Amazing. So today we're talking about AI, and you're spending a lot of your time now thinking about AI. The theme for this conference is how do we get the next 10 years right? And I was actually in Bologna with you on Friday where you were doing the commencement speech for the business school there. And you talked about AI and you had this wonderful phrase of the future is both sooner and stranger than you think. Can you unpack that a little bit? What is the future going to look like? How is AI going to get us to that future?
So, making predictions about the future is a certain way to look a little foolish a bit later. But the reason why I use this phrase, the future is sooner and stranger than you think, is we do have the tech acceleration by which new things happen. So if you were in the 50s, you thought we were going to have flying cars soon. And we're en route to flying cars, but we didn't actually predict at all mobile phones, the internet, a bunch of other things. And that is part of what happens is in technological innovation is the ability to fully predict the future is actually, in fact, not anyone's superpower, right? And so the general approach and dynamic for this thing is to not try to overly believe that you know exactly what's going to happen, but to try to ask good questions and then try to steer and then correct as you're going. And so, a lot of times, especially kind of a more European approach, is to say, well, we should plan the whole thing and make that happen, especially within software, where AI is also, reintroducing kind of stochastic programming and things like that as ways of operating. You have to expect that you have a certain dynamism. There's no way to predict each possible positive, each possible negative. What you do is you steer into it. Now, part of that, if you look at, kind of what the future is coming, a very simple way of looking at the kind of superpowers that you have line of sight from where AI is today is enabling everything we do in communications. So, and that may seem small, but everything we do as human beings is communication. We, in companies, we internally communicate, we externally communicate. When we do science, when we do planning, all of that involves communication. And you can already play with, things like ChatGPT or Pi or other things in order to see how it is as a communication amplifier. That's just the beginning for what will happen. So every industry will change. Because even if you say, well, I'm a steel manufacturer, it's like, well, but you still have communications. You still have internal work, meetings, you still have sales and marketing, you still have planning, you still have analysis, you still have knowledge generation. All of these things are part of what's going to be happening with AI. And then, then the question comes in is, what's the second order effects of that from increasing speed, increasing quality of communication, increasing quality of understanding? Will it help amplify scientific progress? Obviously, we've seen some of that with protein folding. We've seen some of that with mathematical hypotheses, other things. That will continue, that will amplify. But even if I was, for example, a theoretical physicist and there was no AI to help me with theoretical physics, even that, I would still be helped with applying for grants, right? Navigating, the time and efficiency of how I work to have more time for my, where I have unique eyes. I'm not a theoretical physicist, where a theoretical physicist would have an edge. And that's true for all of us and for all of work.
One of the themes that you've talked a lot about is AI is amplifying humanity. It's not something that's going to remove our humanity, it will actually amplify it and improve it. You're a big fan of friendship. You founded LinkedIn, and networks are sort of at your core, and friendship is at your core. Inflection AI is about personal AI. It's about a personal assistant. Do you have any views on how AI is going to change friendship? Are we all going to replace our human friends with AI friends? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Or how is it going to amplify human friendships? What do you think?
Well, I'll start with a general principle to go to pi and then to the specific question. The general principle is, whatever we're worried about with artificial intelligence as a negative, we can also use artificial intelligence as a positive, as part of the solution. So part of my criticisms of the critics is that they go, this is going to be disastrous because of reason X, work, transformation, something else. And you say, well, actually, in fact, if you were actually working to help, you could be figuring out what is the way that we can building AI that would help with that problem. So you say, well, truck drivers are going to be out of work because we're going to have autonomous vehicles. Well, you can build AIs to help them look at what other kinds of work are possible, learn how to connect those work, learn how to learn to do those work, and help them do that work. So all of that's possible in those arenas. And so that's a kind of a general design principle for thinking about technology and thinking about AI when you're doing this. And it's part of the reason why I'm a techno-optimist. I say I'm a techno-optimist, not a techno-utopian, which is we can build much, much better futures. It doesn't automatically, accidentally happen. We have to design for it. We have to work for it, but it's totally doable within our power. Next level down, part of how Mustafa, who I think is on stage next, and the rest of the team in Inflection and I were working on Pi was to say, well, it's obviously it's a companion to help you navigate life. Is there a danger in that it says, talk to me, don't talk to other people? And obviously Hollywood films, even as positive as Her is, it's one of the more positive ones about AI. It's like it kind of shows for drama and conflict, what could be a dystopia is like, well, talk to me rather than talk to your friends. But the way the Pi is designed is to try to help you with a best quality life. So it would be a degradation of life. It was like, oh, don't talk to your friends, talk to me. It's, no, how are you doing? Did you hang out with your friends? Oh, you had a difficult interaction and you missed them. Have you thought about reaching out? In talking to me, can I help you reconnect with your friends in good ways? So you want to design it in ways to amplify humanity, right? In ways to help you with that. And by the way that we all navigate friendship, and part of the reason why we talk about friends and friendship and so forth is we say, well, how can I be, a better friend to Alice? How can I be a better friend to, Megan? How can I be a better friend? And what are the things? And actually, in fact, having your friends help you with that is part of what friends do. And so my view is we will craft these things in ways, and people will prefer the ones that help them connect their friends. And then the very last point to the kind of friendship thing, look, there are some people who go, look, I really would rather not interact with other people, and if you give me an AI companion, that's great because it doesn't feel as demanding or challenging as other people, and that happens. But I think the majority of people really like human connection. It's actually something they prefer. They may be lonely and actually they don't have that human connection, and it can play a partial substitute as a way of doing it. Fine, they're lonely, and how do you help them get there? But like as an anecdote example, today there are more people watching human chess matches than there have been at any time in history.
Yeah.
No one's watching AI chess matches, right? That's because we have this interest in human interaction and what humans do, and that's, I think, one of the reasons I have really no worries about the replacement of friendship.
So you say you're a techno-optimist. I think we should dig into this. So the UK is hosting the Global AI Safety Summit later on in this year. In fact, my co-founder, Matt Clifford, is Sherpa to the Prime Minister on getting this organised. The topic of the summit is AI safety. This is something that is more and more in the press every day about how robots are going to take our jobs or destroy the world. You are an unabashed accelerationist. You believe we should go faster. Just talk me through how you think about speed in the context of AI safety.
So acceleration doesn't mean don't ask the difficult questions, don't chart what risk should be, those kind of things. You want to know how to navigate. It's just like, for example, if you said the only way you accelerate a car is you close your eyes and ignore the other cars on the road. Like, no, that's not the way you accelerate a car. You're actually paying attention, you're accelerating in order to merge, you're doing other things. Acceleration can be actually, in fact, a safety measure. And in this case, I think that it is a safety measure because not only, well, I'll start with the most basic point, which is in building the large language models, we find that we can more naturally align them with human interests and concerns, and they learn that better the larger scale they are. So for example, you say, well, let's try to train these models in order to be positively interactive, don't end up picking up, kind of garbage racism or sexism or stuff from the internet, be positive even if you're getting weird reaction, interactions and prompts and so forth. That training becomes much more natural when you are at a larger scale model. And like take, for example, a more tangible like a tutor. It's easier to create tutor AIs that don't just give you the answer, but help you lead you to the answer, again, at larger scale models and have the sophistication of doing that. So that's a evidentiary point about how more alignment and safety with human considerations comes with larger scale models, technology of the future. But it's also part of the reason why the acceleration is, as to the earlier point of sooner and stranger, is nobody, not anyone in this room, not any regulator, not any academic, can say, I know exactly what the future is with technology, and it's this, not this. I mean, it's actually a certain amount of humility in well, we don't really fully know. That doesn't mean we say we don't know anything. We don't really fully know. So developing, deploying, learning, adjusting at a high clock speed is the relevant thing. Well, getting into that is, well, which are the real errors and which are the things we need to do? And so, so for example, our introducer talked a little bit about like, well, what are the worries in work? And it's like, well, which worries are we going to hit when? And how can we then adjust it to have the technology of the future to be helpful, right? So for example, to go back to the very early history of this country, you get to the mass manufacture of clothing not by saying we're going to stay at everything being hand woven. We are going to introduce the loom, right? And we're going to learn how to adjust. And we go, well, okay, the factories are a little inhuman. We got to make the factories more human. We got to do. It's the same pattern for why that acceleration into the future is actually, in fact, valuable. When we built the car, we didn't know about safety belts, we didn't know about window washers, we didn't know about crumple zones, we didn't know about, and yes, they're all very used to have, but we wouldn't get there if we said, we're not going to allow this to drive until we have all those things. Well, then we would have all arrived here in horses and carriages, right? And again, that's a less good universe.
So if you think we should go faster, what are the barriers to that? Is it regulation? Is it compute? Is it talent? What are the things that we need to speed up?
Well, I think, look, if there was intervention, it's the intervention to how, like, for example, to critics is, what is the thing we should be building? So you say, like people say, well, we got to slow down these large tech companies. Like, well, actually, in fact, what I would like to see is I'd like to see a medical assistant and a tutor on every single one of these. I'd like to see it accessible by every 3-year-old, by every 80-year-old who has access to one of these devices. So in part of acceleration is to say accelerate towards the outcomes that have the elevation of humanity that possible fears and criticisms have. And so what I'd be doing as a government wouldn't be going, well, let me make sure that you stop work for 6 months, as per something I thought was a little foolish earlier this year. And I can go through that in any depth if we decide to want to do that. But the question is, how do we get to the good things that help us with the social issues as soon as possible? And that's part of the acceleration. I mean, the technology is going to be built into the future almost no matter what, given many companies, many countries, all the rest. Most of the the IP for how to do this is a matter of public record. So it's very easy with people who have the right mathematical, computational knowledge, and if they get the compute to start building this stuff. It's one of the reasons why you see it happening in countries around the world now, and not just the U.S., not just London. Even though one of the central kickoff to the modern AI revolution was right here with DeepMind, with Demis and Mustafa and Shane, and so so you have to the focus is on navigation of the acceleration. Now, obviously, there's a set of things about there's lots of different ways to try to impede it, and part of the thing I was gesturing at the earlier 6-month foolishness is if you say, well, okay, like I asked one of the authors of the letter, what were you hoping to accomplish? He said, well, everyone would stop for 6 months, and you're like, okay, I thought I needed to talk to you about the foolishness in technology. I actually think I need to talk to you about your theory of human nature, right? Because you think you're going to issue a letter and every human being is going to stop.
Yeah.
So you say, okay, so who are the ones who slow down, who agree to the 6-month pause? Well, the ones who do are the ones who care about humanity. The ones who don't are the ones who don't. Yeah. So almost QED, issuing a blanket 6-month pause is an anti-humanist maneuver. They think it's from a humanist side, but it's actually, in fact, a mistake. Because what you want is the humanist efforts, the ones that are concerned with, kind of call it equal participation, or Megan did a great job up here, a few minutes ago, kind of diverse inclusion. Those are the efforts you want to be accelerating.
Well, just to pick up on an earlier point from Megan, which sounds like you're in favour of as well, is when we talk about talent, isn't necessarily about taking technical talent on the journey or increasing the supply of technical talent. It's making sure that policymakers, government officials, bureaucrats understand this and can help navigate the challenges that it's going to bring.
100%. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm in Europe this week, right, is trying to help out how I can. And I think that part of the question is to think about talent not just as a question of, what is the specific engineering of the machine learning and so forth, but also like when you say, well, I have a different than technical background, to be figuring out, well, how do I contribute in helping the right thing be built, right? So it's not stop that one thing that I think is really bad. You can point it out. It's a useful person to dialogue, but and here, this is the harder work. Here is the thing that would be very good to have built.
So we're in the UK. You've been spending a lot of time in the UK and Europe speaking to various governments. Where could the UK in particular have an edge in AI?
Well, the good news for the UK is given that, in 2010, 2011, and Demis, Mustafa, and Shane, kicking this off, there's one of the central hubs of artificial intelligence in the world is here in London, and so it has a variety of leadership already, and that leadership includes not just building this amazing technology, but also the concerns around safety, the concerns around human alignment, the concerns around global participation, the concerns around all of that stuff was amongst the earliest conversations that I had with all of the founders of DeepMind. And I think that, part of the reason why Matt, agreed to take a leave of absence to go work full time was again this kind of public service. Is I think that that kind of, how do we drive innovation while paying attention to safety, is I think one of the things that the UK brings is a very good sensibility, and I think it will be. From way back to my ancient days as a student at Oxford, one of the things I learned from being, living here for a few years was a much more global perspective than I'd gotten in the U.S. And even though I'd, was kind of raised in kind of globally conscious U.S. environments, there's just kind of nothing like meeting people from, tens of countries and exchanging views on, well, what's that perspective and this perspective, and I got much more of that here, and I think that's one of the things that the that the that the that the that all, obviously European as well, but British also bring to kind of the perspective in tackling these issues, and it's one of the things I anticipate will be a key feature of the forthcoming summit.
Maybe it's worth touching on open source. So OpenAI, the open is not about open source. I think there are a number of concerns at the moment around how open source, in particular at the moment, LLMs, are going to increase the AI safety challenge. What's your view on open source?
So I was on the board of Mozilla for 11 years. I've been an enormous open source advocate. LinkedIn's used a ton of different open source technologies in building its earliest things. LinkedIn has then since contributed a bunch of new open source projects. I think open source is a fundamental good for the world. The challenge with open source is that open source, once it's open, is 100% for everybody. And if you think about these open source models as human amplifiers, and they're strong amplifiers, that 100% for everybody has a challenge at, whether it's the 90th, 95th, 98th percentile, criminals, rogue states. There's a stack of folks who use open source too. And if you think, well, this could be used for misinformation, and try to, the disruption of democracies, think of what that might mean in Russian hands. If you think about, it could be used for cybercrime. There's gangs, there's the Russians, there's the North Koreans, there's a stack of folks, and all of this then becomes. So I think we need to figure out how to have a broadly more open environment that isn't 100%. And I think, when I talk to various of the AI companies who are committed to the open source thing, I say, look, I think one of the things you have to figure out is how do you figure out how to have the open environment, which, as a venture capitalist at Greylock, as a investor, as an entrepreneur, I want open source, but how do you figure out how to be something less than 100%, right? And it can be as broad as possible. That'd be a great thing, but something less than that, just to avoid those potential serious problems.
Well, it feels like this is one of the differences where often AI safety challenges are compared to the nuclear race and the nuclear arms race. This does feel like one of the big differences where actually if you're a nuclear scientist or researcher, you are very, very carefully monitored and tracked, whereas actually this is completely different.
Yeah, and it has to be different because you can, because of the scale compute revolution, which is really what we're in with this AI function, it is of necessity driven from the commercial side. People say, wow, why is it only commercial? It's like, well, actually, in fact, the depth of not just capital, but also the taking the risks of building compute, the assigning teams of hundreds of people and getting them all to work together all happens much more naturally and regularly within the commercial side. That's part of the reason. So we need to approach it in public-private partnerships. But that means that it's then, unlike the nuclear, which was easy to kind of contain within a national security apparatus, this is much broader. So we have another challenge of navigation. The parallel is good, but the parallel has some new innovations and new frameworks that we need to figure out.
Well, that is probably a good jumping off board to talk about startups. Entrepreneur First, we invest in technical individuals and help them build companies, and we've done that for the last 10 years, and the majority of our portfolio uses AI in some way, built Europe's first computer vision unicorn. But it does feel like now is both a brilliant time to build an AI startup and a tricky one. There is enormous capital pouring into the space. But if you look at something like Inflection AI, I think you guys have now raised $1.3 billion. How old is the company?
Oh, year and a half.
A year and a half. That might be out of the out of scope for many people who are thinking about starting a company right now. What would your advice be for a founder who is looking to start an AI company who doesn't have the ability or the network to be able to raise 100 million, let alone $1 billion? Where is there still opportunity in the AI stack for a very early stage first-time founder?
So, One of the good things is there's going to be amplification across everything. So there's going to be a lot of win states. It's not just going to be a few, there's going to be a number. And one of the things that I think, and I think you guys are doing a great job at this at Entrepreneur First, is there's a lot of places where you say, well, we build our own model, we build a smaller model, we tune it, et cetera. There's a bunch of things there. There's also we use AI provided through APIs, whether it's OpenAI, Azure, Google, Anthropic, other ones, and we'll use those APIs in order to underlie the thing we're doing. Still, the law of tech business is still a law of tech business. You figure out how to build. You have a new solution for consumers, a new solution for businesses. That new solution is opened up by this new tech platform, right? The last, of these major revolutions were things like cloud and mobile. They open up these these tech opportunities, and you can still build new businesses with them because of the new tech platforms. And AI is, I think, the biggest of these, but in part because it amplifies all of them. AI wouldn't exist without the internet, but it amplifies the internet. AI wouldn't exist without mobile, but it amplifies mobile. AI wouldn't exist without cloud computing, but it amplifies cloud computing. And so it's that amplification, but it's still a new tech platform. And so whether it's a enterprise security business, a SaaS productivity business, a new form of consumer entertainment app, all of these things, there are new opportunities because of AI. And it isn't just, OpenAI that's going to be doing them.
So what I'm hearing from you is that you don't need to necessarily have a PhD in machine learning to be able to enter this wave of AI startups.
Yes.
Do you have a view on what are the skills or types of people who are going to win in this next phase as founders?
Given yours and Matt's excellent book, I understand the question. I don't know if there's something more particular than the usual set of competencies one looks for in a tech founder, where she or he might be obviously some cognizance around technology and technology trends is always important, but having an infinite learning capability, having a very strong theory of the game that you're going into, while also being adaptive and changing, part of the learning, an ability to assemble networks of resources around you, because you'll need co-founders, right? Talent, capital, partners, other things, and that assembling that network is also, critical for all successful tech entrepreneurs. An ability to take a bold gamble. There is no innovation without risk, and then adjust. And sometimes the adjustment is, it didn't work, right? Yeah. Next play. I think it's the same set of things. Now we have a new technology with, kind of the patterns of what's happening with AI, and that's going to be very fast evolving, much faster than mobile and so forth. And so that speed coefficient may be to navigate the uncertainty and the dynamism of that speed coefficient is probably, extra emphasized in the modern entrepreneurs.
It feels like the generative AI boom has reinvigorated San Francisco and reinvigorated Silicon Valley post-COVID. Do you have a view on whether there is a better location in the world to start, if you're thinking about starting a generative AI company right now? Should you go over to the Bay Area? Can you do it from London? Is there somewhere else in the world that is the best place to found?
Well, you certainly can do it from London. And part of what I was doing yesterday and the day before in Paris was meeting some of the AI companies there. And so it can be done in a number of places. Generally speaking, depth of tech talent, availability of venture capital that's willing to take risks, ability to get to scale, all these things, the normal things. I still think that Silicon Valley is one of the best places in the world to do it, and that's not a anti-London or anything else. Part of the reason why I so much applaud the various network works Entrepreneur First, the other ones, that is happening is because we want more tech centers in as many places as possible. We want them in London, we want them in Paris, we want them in Berlin, right? The world is better with this. And so, so I think it is doable. I think you need to chart what your, kind of part of what an entrepreneur does is say, well, these are the network assets that I can potentially bring to bear. This is the opportunity. This is what the competition looks like. This is what the future looks like. Here's how I try to navigate. The shape of those look different in different places. And it's still a little easier, I think, to do it in places like Silicon Valley than, London. But that's part of your work. And
Well, I think part of it is about having the bridge, right?
Yeah.
It's the connection between these different
Yeah.
places where the UK has an incredible talent pool
Yes.
and an incredible venture ecosystem as well. But actually, both of those are bolstered and supported
Yes.
by having connections to Silicon
Yes.
Valley.
100%. Back to the Silicon Valley comes to the UK.
Back to Silicon Valley comes to the UK. You mentioned infinite learning. This is one of your big themes, is that you believe people should be infinite learners. And I'm sure we have a number of people watching who are currently in corporate companies, institutions, probably are feeling pretty worried about the change that generative AI is going to bring to their jobs and lives. How would you encourage them to be an infinite learner, and how would you encourage them to use generative AI to improve their ability to be an infinite learner?
So, excellent question. The general principle is go experiment, right? I'm surprised the number of people who I hear make definitive statements about what artificial intelligence is, what it's going to do in the future work, and you're like, well, have you played with ChatGPT? And it's like, no. And you're like, okay, try it, right? And try Pi and try all these other things. And it doesn't mean it isn't changing and all the rest, but experimenting with it is a way that you begin to learn things. So like when I first got access to GPT-4, I tried a whole range of things. I spent hours and hours and hours doing things. Now, one is I ended up, of course, having the idea to write the first book on AI, co-written with an AI, thinking, okay, it was good enough to do that, and that's, Impromptu, which is out in March or something, was out in March. And part of that was, oh, well, it's really useful here in this kind of like personal research assistant that's immediately in your pocket. Obviously, the hallucinations and information is being upgraded and improved in all of these AI companies, monthly, weekly. So, the hallucinations problem is diminishing. But even back in last August, I could say I got a pretty good sense of what kinds of things it would give me really good answers on, and what kind of things I would look at a little skeptically, and what kinds of things I wouldn't bother asking, right? Even just on the train through 2021. And it also showed me that, there were elements of, things that I would do as research before that now are amplified. So for example, in today's, AIs, you can feed in 10 Q statements from public companies and say, compare and contrast, and which things should I pay attention to? And that makes it a lot easier for me to be understanding, for example, public company, tech trends, other kinds of things as ways of doing it, and understanding the whole cycle of the progression of what starts with a single or a small group of founders and going all the way up to large companies. But on the other hand, when I would try to get it to help me understand which AI companies I should consider investing in, which I couldn't, the information was useless, right? And so, so it's like, okay, so there's utility here, less utility here, and by experimenting with it and playing with it is, I think, really important. And, if you want parallels, it's like, for example, people who would first go get modern smartphones and play with them had a much better understanding of what the future is coming to. And I think that's the kind of thing. And by the way, it'll be dynamic and changing. You play with it this month, and 3 months from now, you should play with it again, even if you didn't discover anything. And I guess the last thing I'd say is, too often people say, well, I tried this prompt and it didn't work.
Yeah.
And you're like, fine. You said, create an investment memo for me, please, on AI. Well, it's kind of vanilla. Okay. Create an investment memo for me on artificial intelligence, comparing these 3 different types of large language models, programmed in the following kinds of ways, bringing in the concerns that are described by these people, and in what kinds of possibilities the future product might work or might fail. Create that investment memo. Oh, look, it's a little better,
Yeah.
right? So, to really experiment, and experiment means exercise your own brain and creativity is a way of doing it. And by the way, that's part of the reason why I kind of say this is a tool that will elevate humanity, because as you do that, you will also find yourself being better and more nimble and creative and thoughtful as you're doing it.
I think that the word I love that you're using is play, and I think this is probably where younger generations are going to have an advantage, because they're just going to play with these tools and see what happens and spend the time doing that. And as adults with careers and all the rest of it, we actually need to allocate time to just messing around with different AI tools and seeing what happens. I'm still at the stage where I have to remind myself to, ask a question to ChatGPT or say, I had the best Bernard from a member of our team the other day, who I gave him a piece of something I'd written. He went, "Did ChatGPT write this?" I was like, "No, I'd spent hours writing it. I should have got ChatGPT to write it."
It would have been a little quicker.
Would have been a little quicker.
Yes.
You mentioned change there. So change is the new normal. It feels like it is changing unbelievably fast. I don't think OpenAI has committed or said when GPT-5 is going to come out. But do you have any views of what might surprise us about GPT-5 when it does come out?
Well, this gets back to the sooner and stranger thing. So, we did have at OpenAI a pretty good sense that if you looked at GPT-2, GPT-3, GPT-4, what some of the attributes would be. And that's part of it. When I saw 2 to 3 was when I knew that 4 was going to be pretty interesting, because part of what I do is I look at what is the next thing, and is it like, it will asymptote at some point, but is it going to asymptote in the next one? No. Okay, that's going to be a lot more interesting. And it gave deeper, more robust answers. It was part of the things that you see in the impromptu book. If you, because I was comparing and contrasting some of those prompts with what you'd get from GPT-3, and you got much easier to do a book with GPT-4 than GPT-3 in terms of, kind of partnering as a research assistant. And so that will continue. You'll get more robust, like kind of a detailed, like things of forms of reasoning, doing detailed analysis, subtlety and robustness in information, all of that stuff, that will be better in 5 than 4. Now, this is where it gets surprising, because one of the things that I thought was funny, and I put elements of this in the book too, was that GPT-3 basically didn't have a sense of humor, and GPT-4 does. And you could get it to do a bunch of what is sometimes in the U.S. referred to as dad jokes. I don't know what they're referred to.
Yeah, it was the same.
Okay, here. Light bulb jokes, other kinds of things, but your forms of cultural haiku, and you could get, things like I would ask it, how many Reid Hoffmans does it take to change a light bulb? And it would say 1, but he'd have to engage its entire network in order to do it, right? And it was
a good joke.
Yes, it was like, wow, right? Not bad. And it can do more sophisticated ones. The priest, the rabbi, and the lawyer walk into a bar. It can do those, and things like this. And that was interesting and humanizing in some good ways. And what the other surprises would be for 5, I don't know, other than I guarantee they will be there.
It's hard to imagine. You've talked a lot about the link between AI and creativity, and jokes is one part of it.
Yes.
But do you have a view on, and I suppose it goes back to the point around humans playing chess versus AI playing chess. Do you have any views on how art is going to be valued differently when it's produced by an AI versus a human, and how that might change?
Well, I think you gestured the right way. We care a lot about our identity as human beings within the tribe, connecting with each other, doing things like that. That's what we have a very deep kind of emotional, tactile connection and presence with that. And that continues to matter to us in these. And I think that will be true in art too. And that's part of the reason why I'm not really worried about people going, we'll have no more artists. It'll just be generated by, DALL-E and other things. It's like, no, actually, in fact, I think it's the new tool, and art evolves through technology. I mean, we didn't always have oil paints. I know that may be a shock to some people, and art does evolve through this, and this is the new technological medium. And like one of the things I was amused by academics going, oh my gosh, the essay for the application to college, it's disruptive, it's the end of the world, and you're like, well, actually, in fact, it's called progress. I mean, just because you've locked in the last 80 years of this is what your college admissions look like, figure out the better college admissions, right? Don't be lazy and stuffy and institutional in terms of past-oriented. Be future-oriented. Figure out how to use this technology to be better. Because before we had, widely available paper and typewriters and computers, essay applications weren't available, right? And so, that kind of thing is kind of how you evolve. And I think the same thing is going to be true of art. And so I think what people are going to care about is how art kind of offers different lenses into the human experience, into perception, into presence, into connection with the world and other people. And I think they're still going to care about that from human beings. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they're going to mind that there is new tools, right? Just as there's always new tools in art as a way of getting there.
Well, it feels like one of the sort of themes of this conversation is around, we need to be nimble. We need to acknowledge the change and proactively adopt these tools and see them as the future and our future way of life. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you think is important for our listeners to either take away or to go on and muse on, or to go and, ask Pi, Inflection AI's personal assistant?
Well, I guess I will go to kind of the Pi impromptu point, which is typically people will go and say, okay, well, I'll ask it something that, I think a computer would be good for. And that's not bad. Do that too. But like, for example, they'll go and say, okay, well, rather than typing the search query into, search engine of your choice, I'll type it into, Pi or ChatGPT. And that's a good thing to do. Do that. Try it. But also try things you hadn't thought about. Like, one of the things that, was like when I was talking to a friend last year about how to express things, I said, look, for example, ask it like, okay, your good friend's treasured pet just passed away. How might you engage in consoling them? Ask that question. See how that is. Because it's, again, that human amplification. So go across the range of human experience. Because I think that part of AI is not just to make ourselves individually better, but also how we're better with each other, right? And because part of the human experience is, is how we contribute to each other's lives. And I think AI can actually help with that, but you have to start thinking about that. You have to start doing that. You have to start experimenting with that in various ways. And so, like a friend of mine was having a birthday party, and this friend's impossible to get gifts for. And so I sat down with ChatGPT and I, created a set of things. It took some effort doing the prompts, but it was like, an ice cream that is designed in that friend's name, with that kind of thing. And which, by the way, I could never design an ice cream without ChatGPT. That would have been a fool's errand, or do not try this at home kind of thing. And so, but like those kinds of things, I think are the important things that I would add in.
Amazing. Well, it feels like, even if you aren't necessarily in the business of building AI tools, we all can contribute to building how AI tools are used and what how they're going to influence our lives. Reid, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for providing a techno-optimistic perspective on AI. And thank you for joining us here today.
Alice, thank you, and thanks everyone for coming.